When a school bus driver sees a little girl sprinting frantically toward his bus, he assumes she's just running late. But when she climbs aboard and reveals the chilling reason she ran, his face turns pale and he knows he must act fast. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe in standing up for the vulnerable, be sure to like and subscribe for more. The chill of a frosty morning wrapped around the quiet suburban streets as Miles P. guided the yellow school bus through its usual route. The rhythmic hum of the engine filled the otherwise tranquil neighborhood, punctuated by the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Miles, a dependable man in his late 40s with a kind face and a streak of gray edging his dark hair, kept his focus on the road ahead. It was a routine morning, or so it seemed. As the bus rounded a curve, movement in the side mirror caught Miles's attention. A small figure was sprinting down the street, her coat flapping behind her like wings. Miles squinted, immediately recognizing the girl as Hazel Carter, one of the quieter students on his route. Her desperate pace and frantic arm-waving froze the routine rhythm of his thoughts. Slowing the bus to a halt, Miles watched as Hazel reached the side of the vehicle, banging on the door with her tiny fists. Her cheeks were flushed, tears streaming freely down her face. Something was wrong, very wrong. Miles swung the door open, his voice calm but laced with concern. "Hazel, what's going on?" The 8-year-old stumbled up the steps, her breaths coming in jagged gasps. Her trembling hands clutched the straps of her oversized backpack, and her tear-rilled eyes darted nervously back toward the modest house she'd come from. "Please?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "Don't leave me. I need help." Miles quickly set the bus in park and stepped down to her level. "Hazel, slow down," he said gently, his steady tone masking the unease rising in his chest. "You're safe here, just tell me what's wrong." Hazel's chest heaved as she struggled to find the words. I can't go back there," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He said he'd hurt me if I told anyone." Miles's jaw tightened as a chill ran through him. Her small frame quivered with fear, and the bruises on her wrists, barely visible under her coat sleeves, didn't escape his notice. He knelt to meet her eyes, his weathered hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Hazel, listen to me. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you while you're with me. But I need you to tell me who's trying to hurt you." Her lips quivered and she shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I can't. He'll know I told." Miles's heart broke at her words, but he kept his voice steady. "You did the right thing coming to me. You're not alone in this, okay? I promise." After a moment's hesitation, Hazel nodded. She wiped her nose on her sleeve and let Miles guide her to the front seat. "Stay right here," he said softly. "I need to make a call." Leaving the bus engine off, Miles grabbed his phone and called the school counselor, Miss Hall. The seasoned counselor answered almost immediately, her tone growing serious as Miles explained the situation. "Hazel's been on my radar for a while," Miss Hall admitted. "She's been withdrawn lately, but nothing pointed to this. I'll call Child Protective Services right now. In the meantime, don't leave her side." "Understood," Miles replied, glancing at Hazel, who sat huddled in the front seat, her knees drawn to her chest. After completing the morning route, Miles parked the bus at the school. Miss Hall met him at the entrance, her expression grave. Together they gently coaxed Hazel into her office, where the girl clung tightly to Miles's arm, refusing to let go. "Please don't make me go back," she whispered. Miss Hall knelt beside her, her voice soft but firm. "Hazel, we're here to help you. You're so brave for speaking up. We just need to know a little more so we can keep you safe." But Hazel shook her head, silent tears spilling onto her cheeks. Miles crouched beside her again. "You've already been brave, Hazel. You don't have to face this alone anymore." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach her. She nodded hesitantly, but didn't loosen her grip on his sleeve. When the CPS caseworker arrived, the atmosphere grew heavier. Hazel's fear reignited as the woman introduced herself. "Hazel, I'm here to help you," she said gently. "I'll take you to a safe place where no one can hurt you." "No!" Hazel cried, her arms wrapping around Miles's waist. "Please don't make me go. I want to stay with you." Miles's throat tightened, but he knew he couldn't promise what wasn't his to give. He knelt and held her hands, his voice firm but kind. "Hazel, I can't go with you, but I'll make sure you're safe. I'll be here, and I'll check on you. I promise." Her wide, teared eyes searched his face for reassurance. Finally, she let go, reluctantly taking the caseworker's hand. As they walked away, Hazel glanced back, her small face filled with fear and hope. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the small, neatly organized office as Miss Hall, the school counselor, adjusted her glasses and glanced toward Miles and the CPS caseworker, Victoria Jenkins. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on all of them, but it was Miss Hall who broke the silence, her voice tinged with regret. "I should have seen it earlier," Miss Hall admitted, clasping her hands tightly. "Hazel has been so withdrawn these past few months. She comes in late, always tired, and sometimes her clothes seem unkempt. I noticed little things, scrapes, bruises, but she always had a quick excuse. I fell off my bike or I tripped at the park. I didn't want to jump to conclusions." Miles, seated nearby, his bus driver uniform slightly wrinkled after a long day, leaned forward. "You couldn't have known," he said gently. "Kids are good at hiding things when they're scared." Victoria Jenkins, a woman in her late 40s with a no-nonsense air about her, tapped her pen against a notepad. Her sharp eyes scanned the room as she spoke. "It's common in cases like this. The abuser instills fear, makes them think speaking up will only make things worse. That's why it's critical we handle this carefully." Miles glanced at Hazel, who sat in the corner of the office, her small hands clutching a warm cup of cocoa. She seemed lost in the oversized chair, her eyes darting between them like a cornered animal. Every now and then her gaze flitted to the door, as though she expected it to burst open at any moment. Victoria approached Hazel with the practiced ease of someone used to navigating delicate situations. She crouched to the girl's level, her tone soft but deliberate. "Hazel, can you tell me about home? We're here to help you. No one will hurt you, I promise." Hazel shrank further into the chair, her fingers tightening around the cocoa cup. She stared at the floor, her lips pressed tightly together. "Hazel," Miles said, his voice steady but warm. "Remember what you told me this morning? That you wanted help? We're all here to make sure you're safe." Her small frame shook slightly as she whispered, He said if I told anyone, he'd find me." The room went silent. Victoria exchanged a glance with Miss Hall, then jotted something down in her notebook. "Who, Hazel?" Victoria pressed gently. "Your dad?" Hazel didn't answer, but her trembling nod was enough. Victoria straightened, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal a flash of anger. "Okay," she said firmly. "Hazel, you won't be going back there tonight. We're going to find a safe place for you." "No!" Hazel cried, her voice breaking. "He'll come for me. He said he would." Miles moved to her side, kneeling so that their eyes met. "Listen to me, Hazel. Nobody's going to let that happen. Not Miss Hall, not Victoria, and not me. Do you believe me?" Hazel hesitated, her wide eyes searching his face. Finally, she gave a small nod. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miles found himself driving through Hazel's neighborhood. The image of her tear-streaked face and trembling hands replayed in his mind like a broken record. Something about her fear felt deeper than the surface, as though it hinted at a darkness far worse than they had imagined. As he passed the Carter house, a modest two-story home with a neglected lawn, Miles spotted movement in the driveway. Squinting through the dim light, he recognized Adam Carter. The man's broad frame was hunched as he wrestled a heavy duffel bag into the trunk of his car. Even from a distance, Adam's agitated movements were obvious, his head darting around, his shoulders tense. Miles slowed his vehicle and parked a discreet distance away, watching as Adam slammed the trunk shut and wiped his hands on his jeans. The man looked over his shoulder twice before heading back toward the house. The sight sent a chill down Miles's spine. His instincts, honed from years of working with people, told him something wasn't right. But he wasn't a cop. He couldn't barge in and demand answers. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed Detective Harry Anders, an old family friend. Harry picked up on the second ring. "Miles, what's up?" "I need your help," Miles said, his tone urgent. "It's about one of the kids on my route. Her name's Hazel Carter. She came to me this morning, terrified, saying her dad threatened her. CPS is involved now, but I just saw him loading a huge duffel bag into his car." He looked off. Harry's voice grew serious. "Did you see where he went?" "No, but he's back in the house now. I didn't want to approach him without backup." "Good call," Harry said. "I'll run his name through the system, see if anything pops. If CPS is on this, they'll need anything we can dig up." "Thanks, Harry." Miles said. "I just want to make sure that little girl's safe." "You did the right thing, Miles," Harry assured him. "I'll keep you posted." The next day, Victoria Jenkins arrived at the Carter home, her footsteps firm as she approached the front door. The Carter house sat in quiet defiance against the dimming twilight, its curtains drawn tightly and its exterior freshly painted, as though trying to present an image of perfection. Victoria Jenkins, clipboard in hand, squared her shoulders as she approached the front steps. The earlier tension with Adam Carter lingered in her mind, sharpening her instincts as she prepared for another confrontation. This time she resolved to dig deeper. Adam answered the door almost immediately. A strained smile stretched across his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone hovering between forced politeness and thinly veiled irritation. "Mr. Carter, I'm Victoria Jenkins with Child Protective Services," she said, flashing her badge. "I'm here to talk to you about Hazel," Victoria replied evenly, stepping into the house without waiting for an invitation. Her practiced eye scanned the living room. It was immaculate, but the strong chemical smell of bleach hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Adam gestured toward the couch. "I already spoke to the school. Hazel is fine. There's nothing to worry about. But please, come in. Make yourself at home." Victoria ignored his attempt at charm, her focus instead on the details that didn't quite add up. The carpet looked freshly shampooed, its dampness faintly visible under the lamplight. On a side table, a pile of framed photos stood conspicuously tidy, as if hastily arranged. She picked up one of the frames, a picture of Adam, Hazel, and a woman she assumed was Sophia. "That's my wife," Adam said, his voice tightening slightly. "Well, ex-wife now. She left us about a year ago. It's been tough on Hazel." "Hazel mentioned her mother earlier," Victoria said, setting the frame down carefully. "She seemed upset." Adam shrugged, leaning against the doorway. "What kid wouldn't be? Sophie walked out on us without a second thought. I've been doing my best to hold things together, but you know how it is." Victoria nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "You said earlier that Hazel has been struggling. Can you elaborate?" Adam's demeanor shifted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "She's 8 years old. She's bound to have some bad days. Kids fall, they get upset, they say things they don't mean." "And the injuries?" Victoria pressed, her tone firm but not confrontational. "Accidents," Adam replied quickly. "She's clumsy, always has been. Fell off her bike last week, scraped her knee. You know how kids are." Victoria let the silence stretch, watching as Adam's discomfort grew. She glanced toward the kitchen where the faint outline of a mop leaned against the counter, the bucket beside it filled with murky water. Her attention shifted to a door at the far end of the hallway. "What's down there?" she asked, motioning toward it. Adam stiffened. "The basement. Just storage. Old furniture, tools, that sort of thing." "Would you mind if I had a look?" Victoria asked, stepping toward the door. Adam moved quickly, blocking her path. "There's nothing down there worth seeing," he said, his tone sharp now. "Like I said, just storage." Victoria took a step back, her instinct screaming that something was wrong. She made a mental note but didn't push further. Forcing the issue would jeopardize her credibility and escalate the situation unnecessarily. Instead, she adjusted her approach. "Understood," she said smoothly. "Thank you for answering my questions. I'll be in touch." Adam's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his gaze remained wary as he opened the door for her to leave. "Have a nice day," he replied, his voice hollow. Later that evening, Miles Porter sat across from Detective Harry Anders at a small diner on the edge of town. The coffee in front of him had gone cold, untouched as Miles recounted everything he had seen and heard over the past 2 days. "There's something wrong in that house, Harry," Miles said, his voice low but urgent. "That girl didn't just make this up." Anders, a seasoned detective with a perpetually furrowed brow, leaned back in his chair. "You're not the first person to raise concerns about Adam Carter," he admitted, tapping a pen against his notebook. 2 years ago, neighbors called in reports of shouting and banging. When officers showed up, Adam claimed it was an argument with his wife, and she backed him up. No charges were filed. Miles frowned. "What about Hazel? Was she there?" "She was, but nothing pointed to her being in danger, at least not back then," Anders said. He flipped through his notes before adding, "Adam also has a sealed record, an assault charge from his early 20s. He avoided jail by completing anger management classes." Miles's jaw tightened. That doesn't sound like someone who should be raising a child alone. Anders sighed. It's not enough to act on, Miles. Suspicion doesn't hold up in court. Then what will? Miles demanded. Are we waiting for something worse to happen? Anders raised a hand to calm him. We're not ignoring this, but we have to follow procedure. CPS is involved and Victoria Jenkins knows what she's doing. If there's enough evidence, we'll get a warrant. Miles leaned back, frustration etched on his face. I just don't want to see that girl slip through the cracks. At her office, Victoria typed up her report, the faint ache in her temples growing as she recounted the day's events. She detailed Adam's evasiveness, the lingering smell of bleach, and the locked basement door. Each detail painted a picture of a man with something to hide. She paused, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. Her gut told her that Hazel's life depended on what came next. With a steadying breath, she finalized her report and sent it to her supervisor, including a formal request for a warrant to search the Carter home. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a message from a colleague. It was a brief update. Adam Carter has requested a meeting with CPS tomorrow to discuss Hazel's case. Victoria's unease deepened. She had seen this tactic before, a calculated move by abusers to regain control of the narrative. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, the weight of the case pressing heavily on her shoulders. After Victoria filed her report, citing the suspicious circumstances surrounding her visit to the Carter home, Detective Anders reviewed her findings. Alongside the growing concerns about Adam's behavior, the unsettling evidence, a history of domestic disturbances, Sophia Carter's unexplained disappearance, and Hazel's cryptic comments, prompted Anders to push for a search warrant. By the following morning, the warrant was approved. Victoria and Anders coordinated with the precinct, assembling a team to execute the search. The morning was heavy with tension as the police convoy pulled into the quiet street where the Carter home stood. Victoria Jenkins stepped out of her car, clutching her clipboard tightly. Detective Harry Anders was beside her, his expression hard with focus. Officers armed with the warrant and dressed for the operation moved briskly toward the house. Victoria adjusted her jacket to the cool breeze biting at her skin. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she suspected lay ahead. The previous night's unease had only grown after filing her report. Now, with the warrant approved, it was time to act. Adam Carter was already on the porch when the first officer knocked sharply on the door. His expression darkened as Victoria and Anders approached. "What the hell is this?" Adam barked, crossing his arms as he blocked the doorway. His usually polished demeanor was gone, replaced by visible anger. "We have a warrant to search the premises, Mr. Carter," Anders said, holding up the document. His tone was calm but firm. Adam snatched the paper, scanning it quickly before glaring at Victoria. "This is harassment. I've done nothing wrong." "We're just following protocol," Victoria said evenly. "Please step aside so we can proceed." Adam hesitated, his jaw tightening, but eventually stepped back into the house. "Fine, but don't think you'll find anything because there's nothing to find." The house was as pristine as Victoria had remembered, its meticulous order giving the unsettling impression of a stage set for appearances rather than a lived-in home. Officers moved efficiently, opening drawers, checking closets, and photographing every corner. The smell of bleach still lingered faintly in the air, a reminder of the hasty cleanup Victoria had noted during her last visit. Adam trailed behind them, muttering under his breath, "You people are unbelievable. My daughter's been taken and this is how you help?" Victoria ignored his complaints, her attention drawn to the basement door. An officer stood by, waiting for Anders' nod before unlocking it. Adam's protests grew louder. "You're wasting your time down there," he snapped, his voice rising. "It's just tools and junk." Anders shot him a pointed look. "Let us decide that." The basement was dimly lit, the single bulb casting long shadows across the room. Boxes and old furniture were stacked haphazardly, but it didn't take long for the officers to find the first red flag. A loose panel on the wall revealed a hidden compartment. Victoria's stomach churned as an officer pulled out a small bundle of items wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it, the officer revealed blood-stained rags, a broken child's bracelet, and several crumpled pieces of paper. Victoria took a closer look at the papers, her breath catching as she realized they were drawings. Crudely rendered, but unmistakably disturbing. Dark figures loomed over a small child in every sketch. "Document everything," Anders instructed, his voice tight. He turned to Victoria, his expression grim. "This isn't looking good." Victoria nodded, forcing herself to remain composed. "Let's keep going." Further into the basement, a locked closet drew their attention. Adam, who had followed them down, stepped forward, his agitation mounting. "You have no right to go through that," he said, his voice teetering on the edge of control. "We have every right," Anders shot back, motioning for the lock to be cut. Adam's protests grew louder as the closet was opened, revealing a duffel bag sitting ominously on a shelf. Inside the bag were items that made Victoria's heart sink. Sophia Carter's driver's license, credit cards, and personal effects, including a tattered scarf Victoria recognized from one of the photos displayed in the living room. Anders held up the items for Adam to see. "Care to explain why these are hidden in a bag in your basement?" Adam's face twisted in anger. "That's none of your business. Sophia left them behind when she ran off. She didn't care about this family, and now you're dragging her into this mess. You've been holding on to her things for over a year, hidden in a locked closet?" Victoria asked, her tone sharp. Adam's gaze darted away, his jaw working. Seriously, I didn't know they were down here. She must have left them when she moved her stuff." Before Victoria could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. Adam's lawyer, a sharp-suited man with an air of smug confidence, descended the stairs. "All right, that's enough," the lawyer said, his tone clipped. "This search is over." Anders stepped forward, unfazed. "We have a warrant and we're not finished." "You found what you're going to find," the lawyer countered, his voice cold. "Any further actions will be viewed as harassment, and I'll make sure my client's rights are protected." Anders stared him down for a long moment before nodding to his team. "Document everything and wrap it up." Back upstairs, Victoria stood by the front door, her thoughts racing. Adam leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, and his face a mask of defiance. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, directing his glare at Victoria. "You're ruining my life over lies." Victoria met his gaze, her voice steady. "We'll let the evidence speak for itself." As she stepped outside, Anders joined her. "We've got enough to escalate this case," he said quietly. "But we're going to need more to connect the dots, especially about Sophia." Victoria nodded, her mind already piecing together a timeline. "Hazel's case is officially a criminal investigation now, and if Adam had anything to do with Sophia's disappearance, we'll find out." The two stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the case pressing heavily on their shoulders. Behind them, the Carter house loomed, its tidy facade belying the secrets it had tried to hide. "What do you think happened to Sophia? Did she really leave like Adam said? If so, why did she leave Hazel behind? Share your thoughts below. And if you're eager to find out how the story unfolds, give this video a like and keep watching." The tension from the search warrant lingered like an unspoken weight on everyone involved. Detective Anders sat at his desk, the soft hum of the precinct's overhead lights providing the only background noise. His focus narrowed on a single name that stood out from Victoria Jenkins's follow-up report: Clara Mitchell. She had worked for the Carters as a nanny 2 years ago, but left abruptly. Anders leaned back in his chair, his gut telling him she might hold the key to understanding what happened behind the Carter family's polished facade. After making a few calls, he tracked her down to a modest apartment in a neighboring town. Anders pulled his unmarked car to the curb, glancing at Miles Porter in the passenger seat. "You sure you want to be here?" he asked. Miles nodded. "If this can help Hazel, I'll do whatever it takes." The pair climbed the narrow stairs to the second-floor unit. Clara's door opened cautiously after Anders knocked, the security chain still in place. A woman in her late 30s peered out, her eyes shadowed with worry. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Detective Anders," he began, holding up his badge. "This is Miles Porter. We're investigating Adam Carter and need your help." Clara hesitated, the chain rattling slightly as her grip tightened on the door. "I've got nothing to say about Adam Carter," she said curtly. "You should leave." Anders leaned closer, his voice lowering. "I understand you're scared, but Hazel needs you. She's safe now, but we need to know what you saw while you worked for the Carters. It could make all the difference." Clara's expression softened at the mention of Hazel. After a moment of silence, she unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. "Come in," she murmured, her voice barely audible. The small living room was tidy but sparse, suggesting a life of quiet solitude. Clara perched on the edge of her couch, her hands wringing nervously as she avoided eye contact. "I left that job for a reason," she began, her voice brittle. "Adam? He's not the man people think he is." Anders pulled out his notepad, nodding encouragingly. "Take your time." Clara hesitated before continuing. "It started after Sophia left. He changed. His temper was always short, but after she was gone, it got worse. Hazel bore the brunt of it." Her voice cracked. "He humiliated her, yelling at her in front of me, calling her worthless and a burden." Miles, sitting across from her, clenched his fists but said nothing. Clara's hands fidgeted in her lap. "There were times I'd hear Hazel crying in her room, begging to be let out. He'd lock her in there for hours, sometimes overnight, as punishment. When I confronted him, he told me to mind my business, or I'd regret it." Anders's pen paused mid-note. "What about Sophia? Did you hear anything before she disappeared?" Clara's expression grew guarded. "They fought a lot. She wanted to leave, but he wouldn't let her. The last argument I overheard was bad. He was yelling, calling her selfish for trying to take Hazel away. The next week she was gone. Adam said she'd left to find herself, but it didn't feel right." As Anders and Miles wrapped up their interview, Clara's face darkened with worry. "You can't let Adam know I talked to you," she said. "He has a way of making people regret crossing him." "You're protected," Anders assured her. "But your testimony could be crucial. Will you consider coming forward?" Clara hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "If it helps Hazel, I'll do it, but I need anonymity. I can't risk him finding me." Outside, Miles exhaled sharply as they returned to the car. "Hearing her describe what Hazel went through, it's worse than I imagined." Anders nodded grimly. "We're building a strong case, but Adam's the type to fight dirty. He won't go down easily." Later that evening, as Miles finished his route at the bus depot, his co-workers called him over. "Hey Miles, there's a guy outside asking for you," one of them said. Stepping out into the dimly lit lot, Miles found Adam Carter leaning against his car, his arms crossed and his expression dark. "You've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong," Adam said, his voice low and menacing. Miles squared his shoulders. "If protecting Hazel means doing the right thing, then yeah, I'll keep sticking my nose in." Adam's face twisted into a sneer. "You don't know anything about my family. You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a bus driver." Miles's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Hazel deserves better than whatever you're putting her through." Adam stepped closer, his tone turning icy. "You keep pushing, and you'll find out just how wrong you are." As Adam drove away, Miles stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding. The encounter left him shaken, but his resolve hardened. Adam was unraveling, and Miles was determined to see justice served. Miles Porter sat in the break room of the bus depot, his untouched coffee cooling in his hands. The chatter of co-workers faded into the background as his mind replayed Hazel's trembling voice on that fateful morning. The thought of her with a foster family brought some relief, but it didn't erase his growing worry. His phone buzzed, breaking his reverie. It was Victoria Jenkins, the CPS caseworker. "Miles, I thought you'd like an update on Hazel," she said, her voice steady yet cautious. "Is she okay?" Miles asked immediately. "She's adjusting," Victoria replied. "The foster mother says she's still quiet, but she started to open up. She mentioned something significant, a fear her father drilled into her. He told her to never talk about the night Mommy disappeared." Miles gripped the phone tighter. "That poor kid, she's been through hell." Victoria's tone softened. "She trusts you, Miles. That morning on the bus, it was the first time she felt safe enough to reach out. That means something." Miles swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thanks for letting me know. Keep me updated." As he ended the call, determination replaced the worry in his eyes. He couldn't let Adam's manipulations overshadow the truth. But Adam wasn't backing down. By midweek, local news outlets were airing segments featuring him on camera, his carefully constructed persona of a grieving father in full display. "They tore my family apart," Adam said to the reporter, his tone laced with indignation. "CPS acted on baseless claims, and now my little girl is in the hands of strangers. And that bus driver, he's been harassing us for weeks. This is personal for him, not about justice." Miles watched the broadcast in disbelief, sitting in his living room. He clenched his jaw as Adam's fabricated narrative played out on the screen. The reporter leaned in, their tone sympathetic. "What do you hope to accomplish, Mr. Carter?" "I just want my daughter back," Adam said, his voice breaking. "And I want these people to answer for what they've done to my family." The segment ended, and Miles slammed the remote onto the coffee table. The smear campaign was working. He'd already received calls from concerned parents questioning his involvement in the case. The accusations stung, but they also fueled his resolve. Adam might control the narrative for now, but Miles had faith the truth would eventually come out. The next morning, Clara Mitchell arrived at the precinct for her deposition, her determined expression masking the nerves beneath. Detective Anders met her in the hallway, offering a reassuring nod. "You ready for this?" Anders asked. Clara nodded, gripping her file tightly. "As ready as I'll ever be." In the interrogation room, Clara recounted her time working as the Carter family's nanny, her voice steady as she detailed Adam's escalating anger. Adam would yell at Hazel, calling her names and blaming her for everything. After Sophia left, he locked her in a room for hours, sometimes overnight. Anders leaned forward. "What about Sophia? Did you ever witness anything involving her directly?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I heard them fighting more than once. One time Sophia screamed, 'You're going to kill us,' during a particularly bad argument. I reported it, but Adam convinced the responding officers it was just a misunderstanding. That was only days before she disappeared." Clara's voice faltered slightly as she continued. "Adam's behavior wasn't just anger. It was control. He wanted everyone in that house to feel powerless." Adam's attorney wasted no time attacking the credibility of the case against his client during the preliminary hearing. He targeted Clara Mitchell's testimony. "My client is the victim of an unwarranted investigation," the lawyer proclaimed, his voice sharp and calculated. "Miss Mitchell's claims are unsubstantiated, based on personal grievances from her time as a disgruntled employee." Detective Anders sat in the gallery, his jaw tight as he listened to the defense attempt to dismantle the case. Clara Mitchell sat nearby, her posture stiff, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Though visibly shaken, her resolve remained firm as the defense's accusations loomed over her. "And what of CPS's involvement?" the attorney continued, his tone dripping with disdain. "Miss Jenkins acted recklessly, removing Hazel Carter based on speculation and subjective interpretations rather than hard evidence." Anders leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "They're doing everything they can to paint Adam as a victim. We need something irrefutable." He glanced toward Clara, silently willing her to hold steady against the pressure. The courtroom buzzed softly with murmurs as the attorney pressed on, his confidence apparent. Anders clenched his fists, determination burning in his chest. Let them twist the narrative for now. The truth will come out. Back at her foster placement, Hazel sat at the kitchen table with her foster mother, a kind woman named Brooke. The room was warm and inviting, the scent of cookies wafting through the air. Brooke gently encouraged Hazel to talk, her voice soothing. "You don't have to tell me everything," Brooke said, "but if something's bothering you, I'm here to listen." Hazel fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. After a long pause, she looked up, her voice barely audible. "He said I'd go away too if I told." Brooke's heart sank, but she kept her tone calm. "Who said that, sweetheart?" "Your dad?" Hazel nodded, her small hands trembling. "He got so mad that night. He and Mommy were yelling, then he told me to go to my room and not come out." Brooke placed a comforting hand over Hazel's. "You're so brave for sharing this, Hazel. You don't have to be scared anymore." With Victoria's testimony and Hazel's statement, the detectives gained significant leverage. Later that evening, Adam sat alone in his dimly lit living room, nursing a drink. The mask of control he'd worn for so long was beginning to crumble. The court's insistence on pressing the case rattled him, and he couldn't shake the growing sense that the walls were closing in. Paranoia churned with his simmering anger, making him increasingly reckless. Detective Anders leaned against the hood of his car, the early morning light casting long shadows across the driveway of the Carter home. The warrant in his hand felt heavier than it should have, not because of its physical weight, but because of what it represented. A final opportunity to uncover the truth. Anders glanced at the team of officers and forensic analysts assembling behind him. "We're not leaving until we have something definitive," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the cold air. The front door creaked open as Adam Carter, visibly agitated, stepped outside, his jaw clenched. His lawyer, a slick-suited man with a calm veneer, followed closely behind. "This is harassment!" Adam barked, his eyes darting between Anders and the officers. Anders approached Adam, holding up the warrant. "We have every legal right to be here, Mr. Carter. Step aside." Adam's lawyer raised a hand, his tone measured but sharp. "Anything found today will be subject to scrutiny. Don't think for a second we won't fight this." Anders ignored the comment, motioning for the team to begin. As the officers entered, the atmosphere inside the house was eerily still, the pristine rooms almost too perfect. Anders noted the faint scent of cleaning products lingering in the air, a detail that only heightened his suspicion. The team moved methodically, revisiting every corner of the house. Forensic analyst Lisa Grant paused at the basement entrance, her sharp eyes catching a slight discoloration in the edge of the carpet. "Detective, over here," she called out. Anders descended the steps, joining Lisa as she carefully lifted the corner of the newly installed carpet. Beneath it, faint brownish stains marred the concrete floor. "Get him, Isoply," Anders ordered, his stomach tightening. Hours later, Lisa approached him with a grim expression. "It's blood. Preliminary analysis suggests it's old, but DNA confirmation will take time." Anders nodded, his expression hardening. "We'll wait." As the search continued, another officer found a dusty box shoved behind a stack of paint cans in the garage. Inside was a phone, likely Sophia's. Anders flipped through the phone, its cracked screen showing a series of unsent text messages. "Adam, please stop. You're scaring me. I can't keep living like this. Hazel's watching. Please, for her sake." Anders felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. He handed the phone to one of the technicians. "Catalog this, every detail." By late afternoon, the team had collected enough evidence to issue Adam's arrest. Anders approached Adam, who sat in the living room with his lawyer, the air between them thick with tension. "Adam Carter, you're under arrest for the suspected murder of Sophia Carter," Anders said, his voice steady. Adam shot to his feet, his face twisting with rage. "This is insane!" he shouted, his lawyer grabbing his arm to restrain him. "You have nothing. Sophia left me. She's probably somewhere laughing at all of this." Anders stepped closer, his voice calm but cold. "The evidence says otherwise." As the officers escorted Adam to the squad car, the neighborhood gathered outside, their murmurs punctuated by the click of cameras from curious onlookers. Adam's lawyer trailed behind, loudly protesting the legality of the search, but Anders barely registered it. His focus was now on building an airtight case. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, Adam sat across from Anders, his defiance unwavering. "You're making a mistake," Adam said, leaning back in his chair. "Sophia was unstable. She left on her own, and you people are desperate to pin this on me." Anders leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "You're right about one thing. We're desperate. Desperate to get justice for Hazel and Sophia, and the evidence in your basement tells a much different story than the one you're spinning." Adam scoffed, crossing his arms. "Evidence? You mean some stains on a floor that could be from anything? You've got nothing solid." Anders didn't flinch. "We also found Sophia's belongings in your garage. Her phone has messages that paint a very clear picture of what she was going through." Adam's mask of control cracked for a moment, his lips pressing into a thin line. "She was dramatic," he muttered. "Always playing the victim." Anders straightened, his patience wearing thin. "You can keep pretending, Adam, but the walls are closing in." Meanwhile, Miles Porter sat in his bus depot, his mind racing with everything that had transpired. A call from Victoria Jenkins broke through his thoughts. "Miles, I think you should know. Hazel's been asking to see you." Miles hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Is that even allowed?" "I don't want to make things harder for her." "She finds comfort in you," Victoria replied gently. "Sometimes a familiar face can make all the difference." Later that evening, Miles arrived at the foster home. Hazel met him at the door, her small frame trembling slightly, but her face lighting up with a shy smile. "Hi, Mr. Miles," she whispered. Miles knelt down, his eyes softening. "Hey, kiddo, how are you holding up?" Hazel hesitated before stepping forward and wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you for believing me," she murmured. The moment was brief but powerful, and Miles left with renewed determination to see justice served. Back at the precinct, the evidence against Adam was piling up, but his lawyer wasn't going down without a fight. A motion was filed to dismiss the charges, citing supposed irregularities in the search. The legal battle ahead loomed large, but Anders wasn't deterred. "We'll make sure this sticks," he said to Victoria, his tone resolute. "Adam's lawyer can delay, but he can't hide the truth." Victoria nodded, her gaze steely. "Hazel deserves this. Sophia deserves this." As the team prepared for the next steps, Adam's calm facade began to shatter under the weight of his crumbling lies. The truth was coming, and there was no escape. The investigation reached a pivotal moment when Detective Anders discovered that Adam Carter had sold his car to a junkyard just days after Sophia's disappearance. The timing was suspicious enough to warrant immediate action. With a court order in hand, Anders and a forensic team descended on the junkyard, sifting through rows of derelict vehicles until they located the car. Inside the trunk, faint stains were visible beneath a layer of dirt and grime. A quick presumptive test confirmed the presence of blood. "Bag it," Anders instructed the team, his tone grim. The forensic analysts carefully collected milespells, and later lab results confirmed the blood was a match for Sophia Carter. The discovery wasn't just another clue, it was the missing link tying Adam directly to her presumed death. At the precinct, Adam sat in the interrogation room, his demeanor a volatile mix of simmering anger and feigned indifference. The evidence was laid out in front of him. Photographs of the bloodstains, forensic reports, and timelines that dismantled his alibi piece by piece. Detective Anders entered the room with Victoria Jenkins, their presence a deliberate show of unity. Anders sat across from Adam, leaning forward slightly. "You've got one chance to tell the truth, Adam. We found the car. We found Sophia's blood in the trunk. The lies stop here." Adam's jaw tightened as he stared at the evidence, his nostrils flaring. "You're making this up," he spat, his voice shaking. "This is a setup. A damn setup. You and that CPS lady are working together to ruin me." Victoria, standing near the door, kept her tone measured. "No one's fabricating anything, Adam. This is the reality. Sophia didn't vanish into thin air, and you can't keep dodging the truth." Adam's temper boiled over. He slammed his fists on the table, the sharp sound reverberating through the room. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he barked. "This whole thing is a witch hunt. You don't have a shred of proof that I did anything wrong." Anders remained unflinching, his voice calm but firm. "The proof is in that car, and in the stories people around you are finally telling. The blood doesn't lie, Adam, and neither do the people you've hurt." Adam's breathing grew erratic, his face flushed as he glared at the photographs in front of him. His facade of control was crumbling. "She wouldn't listen," he blurted, his voice cracking. "She blamed me for everything, everything. It was always my fault." Anders leaned in, pressing. "What happened that night, Adam? Did things get out of hand?" Adam slammed his fists on the table again, his voice rising. "I didn't mean to—" He stopped himself, his words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. His hands trembled as he buried his face in them. "I didn't mean to kill her," he whispered, his voice muffled and broken. The room fell into a tense silence. Victoria exchanged a glance with Anders, the weight of Adam's confession sinking in. Adam didn't look up. His shoulders sagged as he began to sob, the fight drained from him. The confession was both a victory and a tragedy, marking the unraveling of a man who had tried so desperately to hide his crimes. Outside the room, Victoria exhaled a shaky breath. "We finally got him," she said quietly. Anders nodded, his expression grim. "Now, it's time to bring Sophia home and give Hazel the answers she deserves." Adam Carter's confession marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Under his guidance, a search party ventured into the dense woods behind the Carter home. The air was heavy with tension as officers combed the area, their flashlights cutting through the early morning mist. It didn't take long before they uncovered Sophia Carter's shallow grave. The sight was haunting. Sophia's remains were wrapped hastily in a stained sheet, her body bearing clear signs of struggle. Forensic experts later confirmed the cause of death as blunt force trauma, evidenced by a fractured skull. As the forensic team continued their search of the area, they discovered a crowbar buried nearby. The tool, crusted with dried blood, was sent for analysis. Laboratory results confirmed it was the murder weapon, bearing Sophia's blood and traces of Adam's DNA on the handle. This piece of evidence tied Adam irrefutably to the crime, solidifying the case against him. The discovery of both the grave and the weapon would provide crucial closure for Hazel, but left the team reeling from the tragedy. Even for seasoned detectives like Anders, the weight of the case lingered heavily. It was one thing to suspect the crime, but seeing the tangible evidence of Adam's brutality brought a grim finality to their work. Anders deliberated heavily on how they would break the news to Hazel. He understood the weight of their words would shatter the fragile sense of normalcy she had managed to build in her foster home. After consulting with Victoria Jenkins, they decided that honesty, tempered with care, was the only way forward. When they arrived at the foster home, Anders' usually stoic demeanor was shadowed with unease. He exchanged a glance with Victoria before they knocked on the door. Hazel, curious but cautious, greeted them with the malaise, tentative look she always wore when adults approached her with something serious to say. They led her to the living room, her foster mother staying nearby, ready to offer support. Anders stayed back, his large frame an almost protective presence, while Victoria knelt to meet Hazel's gaze. "Hazel," Victoria began, her voice gentle, her hands clasping Hazel's small ones. "We found your mom." The words sparked a flicker of hope in Hazel's eyes. "She's okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with both longing and fear. Victoria's throat tightened and she hesitated. "No, sweetie," she finally said, her voice trembling. "She passed away. She's gone." Victoria's eyes welled with tears as she squeezed Hazel's hands. "I'm so sorry, Hazel. Your mom loved you more than anything. She tried to protect you, and because of her, we were able to stop your dad from ever hurting anyone again." Hazel's chest heaved as the first sob broke free. "No," she whispered, shaking her head furiously. "No, she can't be gone." Anders stepped forward, his voice softer than Hazel had ever heard. "Hazel, I know this is so hard to hear, but your mom would want you to know that you're safe now." The little girl's sobs filled the room, her small frame trembling as she cried into Victoria's arms, her foster mother gently stroking her hair, whispering soothing words. "I just wanted her to come back," Hazel choked out, clutching tightly to the stuffed animal she always carried. Victoria, her voice cracking, said, "She'll always be with you, Hazel, in your heart, in your memories. She loved you more than anything." Anders turned away briefly, his jaw tightening against his own emotions. As Hazel's sobs slowly quieted into hiccuping breaths, he silently vowed that justice for Sophia and a safe future for Hazel would remain his priority. With Sophia's body recovered, the prosecution began building an airtight case against Adam. The trial was scheduled swiftly, with the weight of public scrutiny adding pressure to the legal teams on both sides. The courtroom was packed on the first day, an almost palpable anticipation hanging in the air. The prosecution wasted no time presenting a harrowing narrative of Adam's abuse and violence. Forensic evidence took center stage. Photographs of Sophia's grave, DNA analysis of the blood and hair fibers found in Adam's car, and expert testimony linking the injuries on Sophia's body to the weapon Adam had discarded. Adam's confession, chilling in its cold simplicity, was played for the jury, silencing the room as his words echoed through the speakers. The emotional toll of the trial was most evident in the testimony of Hazel Carter. Shielded by a partition to block her view of Adam, she sat nervously in the witness chair, clutching a small stuffed animal for comfort. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she recounted the night Adam dragged something heavy into the woods. Her testimony left a visible impact on the jury, many of whom avoided meeting her tearful gaze. Miles Porter, seated in the gallery, clenched his fists, struggling to contain his emotions. Detective Anders, sitting beside him, whispered, "This will be the moment they remember." Clara Mitchell's testimony further cemented Adam's violent nature. She recounted his volatile temper, the verbal and physical abuse she witnessed, and her decision to leave when the danger became too much. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have done more." The defense, desperate to counter the mountain of evidence, launched a series of attacks on the credibility of the witnesses. They painted Clara as a disgruntled former employee and questioned Hazel's memories as the imagination of a traumatized child. However, these efforts rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence and the jury's visible discomfort with Adam's behavior. After several days of testimony, the jury was given the case. The deliberation lasted 3 tense days, with the public anxiously awaiting the outcome. On the 4th day, the jury returned with their decision. Adam Carter was found guilty of second-degree murder and child endangerment. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The verdict was a moment of vindication for Hazel and those who had fought for justice. In the aftermath, Hazel visited her mother's grave for the first time, clutching a simple drawing of her and Sophia smiling together. She knelt by the headstone and placed it gently against the granite, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "I miss you, Mommy." Miles stood a few feet away, giving her space but ready with quiet support. When she turned to him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and gratitude, he offered her a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe now," he said gently. "Your mom would be proud of how strong you are." As Hazel wiped her tears and stood, the weight of her loss mingled with the faint stirrings of hope. The chapter of her father's tyranny was closed, and while the scars would remain, she was finally free to begin healing. The Parker residence was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, its white picket fence and blooming flower beds exuding a sense of calm that Miles Porter hadn't felt in weeks. He parked his car beside Detective Anders' vehicle and stepped out, joining Anders and Victoria Jenkins as they approached the house. Mrs. Parker greeted them warmly at the door, her kind smile setting the tone for the visit. "Hazel's been waiting for you all morning," she said, her voice full of maternal pride. "She's upstairs. I'll let her know you're here." Inside, the home was cozy, filled with soft light and the faint aroma of cookies baking in the kitchen. Miles noticed photographs on the walls, pictures of the Parkers and other children they had fostered over the years. For the first time since meeting Hazel, he felt a sliver of hope for her future. Hazel appeared at the top of the stairs, her tiny frame lost in an oversized lavender sweater. In one hand, she clutched a worn, stuffed bunny, its ears frayed from years of comfort. She paused, peering down at the visitors with wide, uncertain eyes. "Hi, sweetheart," Miles said gently, his voice as soft as the smile tugging at his lips. He took a step closer and knelt to her level, his arms open in a silent invitation. For a moment she hesitated, her grip on the bunny tightening. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, she ran down the stairs and threw her arms around his neck. "Hi, Mr. Miles," she exclaimed, her voice bright and filled with a newfound warmth. "I missed you." Miles's throat tightened as he held her close, his large hand gently patting her back. "I missed you too, kiddo," he managed, his voice slightly hoarse. Victoria Jenkins and Detective Anders stood by, their faces softening as they watched the exchange. Hazel turned toward them, a small, shy smile creeping onto her face. "Thank you for coming to see me," she said quietly, stepping forward to offer each of them a hug. Her embrace was gentle, but it carried a sincerity that made both Anders and Victoria pause. Positively, "You're very welcome, Hazel," Victoria said warmly, brushing a loose strand of hair from Hazel's forehead. "You're doing so well here. We're so proud of you." Hazel's eyes sparkled, with a mix of gratitude and joy. "You're all my family," she said simply, her voice steady as if she'd been practicing the words in her mind. As Hazel settled onto the couch, chatting animatedly about her new school and the friends she was making, the contrast struck Miles, Victoria, and Anders. The frightened, trembling little girl who had clung to Miles on the bus that morning seemed like a distant memory. Her once panicked eyes now shone with hope, and her tentative smile had bloomed into something full and genuine. The three exchanged a glance, their unspoken thoughts clear. Hazel's resilience reminded them that even in the darkest of cases, there was a chance for light to break through. When it was time to leave, Hazel clung to each of them as if afraid they might disappear. She hugged Victoria and Anders quickly, but lingered in Miles's arms. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Miles's voice cracked as he replied, "You're welcome. Don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need anything." Outside, the three stood silently by their cars, the weight of the case lingering between them. "Cases like this remind us why we do this job," Anders said, his voice low but resolute. "It's about more than the law. It's about giving people like Hazel a chance." As Miles drove home, the events of the past weeks replayed in his mind. The desperate plea for help, the relentless search for answers, and the heartbreaking discovery of Sophia's fate. Yet amidst the tragedy, Hazel's courage and resilience stood out as a beacon of hope. He glanced in his rearview mirror one last time, catching a glimpse of the Parker house fading into the distance. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to exhale, knowing Hazel was safe, loved, and beginning to heal. In that moment, Miles realized the profound impact of one small act: stopping the bus, listening and believing. It was a reminder of the quiet power of compassion and the extraordinary outcomes it could inspire. Smiling faintly, he turned onto his street, ready to embrace the peace of his own home, content in the knowledge that he had made a difference. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.